The steady beep of medical equipment was the first thing I noticed when I clawed my way back to consciousness. My throat felt like sandpaper, and the fluorescent lights above made me squint. The room was drowning in flowers, roses, lilies, and arrangements I couldn't name. Their overwhelming sweetness made my stomach turn. My name is Alara, and this wasn't how I'd planned to spend my 28th birthday. You're awake. Zane's voice cracked as he grabbed my hand. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. I've been here every day. The doctors weren't sure when you'd. I tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. A nurse appeared with ice chips, and Zane helped guide them to my mouth. As the cool relief trickled down my throat, fragments of memory started flooding back. Headlights, screeching tires, my parents' voices. My parents. I whispered, though deep down, I already knew the answer. The way Zane's face crumpled told me everything. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, he said, squeezing my hand tighter. They didn't make it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the truth, but it was already burrowing into my chest like a physical wound. When I finally opened them again, I noticed something else was wrong. Very wrong. I couldn't feel my legs. Zane. My voice shook. I can't move my legs. He pressed the call button, and within minutes, Dr. Lin appeared. He was gentle but direct as he explained the extent of my injuries: severe spinal trauma, partial paralysis from the waist down. The words washed over me like waves, each one pulling me further under. With intensive physical therapy, there's a chance for partial recovery, Dr. Lin said, his kind eyes meeting mine. But I want to be honest. It's going to be a long road. I nodded mechanically, still processing. That's when I noticed Zane's mother, Loretta, hovering in the doorway. She'd always reminded me of a bird of prey, elegant but sharp-eyed. Now she was looking at me with what seemed like genuine concern, but something in her expression made me uneasy. We're all here for you, dear, she said, gliding into the room. Her perfectly manicured hand patted my shoulder. Zane's already arranged to take time off work to help care for you. You have. I turned to Zane, surprised. He'd been climbing the corporate ladder at his firm for years, barely taking weekends off. Of course, he said, but something flickered across his face. Doubt? Fear? I've been thinking. Maybe this is a sign. About what really matters. He reached into his pocket, and my heart stopped as he pulled out a small velvet box. I know the timing might seem strange, but life is precious. Will you marry me, Alara? The ring was beautiful, probably worth several months of his salary. But as he slipped it onto my finger, all I could think about was how cold it felt. Behind him, Loretta was beaming, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I need time to think, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Everything's happening so fast. Of course, Loretta jumped in before Zane could respond. You need rest, dear. We should go. She practically pulled Zane from the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the suffocating scent of flowers. As I drifted off to sleep, my mother's voice echoed in my memory. Trust your instincts, sweetheart. They'll never steer you wrong. Something about Zane's proposal, about Loretta's too perfect concern, set off warning bells in my head. But maybe that was just the grief talking. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than a marriage proposal. Coming home should have felt comforting. Instead, I wheeled through my childhood house feeling like a stranger. Ramps had replaced the familiar steps, and grab bars now dotted the walls like metallic scars. The changes were necessary, but they only emphasized how different everything had become. Zane had moved in temporarily to help with my transition home, though his definition of temporary seemed to stretch with each passing day. He'd already filled half the closet in my parents' old room with his designer suits, even though he wasn't working anymore. The contractors did an amazing job with the modifications, Loretta announced, running her hand along one of the new railings. She'd been here every day since my return, rearranging things without asking. Though these old curtains really need to go. They're so dated. Those curtains were hand-sewn by my mother. I gripped my wheels tighter, knuckles turning white. They're staying. Now, dear. Loretta's voice took on that syrupy tone I was growing to hate. You need to focus on healing, not clinging to the past. Zane, tell her. Zane, who'd been absorbed in his phone, looked up with that increasingly distant expression. Maybe Mom's right. A fresh start might be good. Before I could argue, the doorbell rang. Zane's father, Clyde, walked in without waiting for an answer. He rarely spoke, but his presence filled the room like smoke, making it hard to breathe. The estate lawyer called, he announced, addressing Zane rather than me. We should discuss the house situation soon. What house situation? I asked, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. Just some paperwork, Zane jumped in quickly. Nothing to worry about right now. I watched them exchange glances, a whole conversation happening without words. The engagement ring felt heavy on my finger, like a shackle rather than a promise. Later that evening, after the Holloways finally left, I wheeled into my father's study. The room still smelled like his pipe tobacco and old books. But something was off. The antique desk, passed down through 3 generations, looked emptier somehow. I opened drawers, counting the missing items. Dad's vintage fountain pen collection, Mom's first edition books, the small Tiffany lamp that always sat in the corner. Each absence felt like a fresh wound. My phone buzzed, a text from my best friend Lila. Coming by tomorrow. No excuses. Miss your face. 2 hearts. I smiled, my first genuine one in days. Lila would understand. She'd always seen through people's facades, including Zane's perfect boyfriend act when we first started dating. The sound of footsteps made me quickly close the drawer. Zane appeared in the doorway, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. You should be resting, he said, moving behind my wheelchair. Let me help you to bed. I can manage, I insisted, but he was already gripping the handles. Don't be stubborn. You heard what Dr. Lin said about overdoing it. As he wheeled me toward the bedroom, I caught our reflection in the hallway mirror. The concern on his face looked rehearsed, like an actor who'd forgotten his motivation halfway through a scene. Zane, I said carefully, where's Dad's pen collection? His hands tightened slightly on the wheelchair handles. Oh, your mom probably packed it away somewhere. You know how she liked to reorganize. The lie hung between us like poison gas. My mother had never touched those pens. They were Dad's pride and joy, and she respected that. Right, I said, letting him think I believed him. Must be packed away somewhere. That night, after Zane fell asleep, I lay awake listening to his steady breathing. The man next to me felt like a stranger wearing my boyfriend's face. The same face that had proposed to me in the hospital, offering security when I was at my most vulnerable. My mother's voice echoed in my head again. Trust your instincts. Well, my instincts were screaming now. And Lila's visit tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. I needed someone who would tell me the truth, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear. Something was very wrong in this house, and I was going to find out what it was, with or without the use of my legs. Lila arrived like a burst of fresh air, bringing coffee and her no-nonsense attitude. One look at my face, and she knew something was wrong. We settled in the sunroom, away from Zane's constant hovering. Spill it, she said, handing me my favorite caramel latte. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. I told her everything. The missing items, the whispered conversations, the way Zane and his parents exchanged loaded glances when they thought I wasn't looking. With each word, the knot in my chest loosened slightly. I knew something was off with that proposal, Lila muttered. Who proposes to someone who just lost their parents and woke up paralyzed? That's some soap opera-level manipulation. Before I could respond, voices drifted in from the hallway. Loretta and Zane, arguing in harsh whispers. You're taking too long, Loretta hissed. The insurance money won't last forever, and that house. I know what I'm doing, Mother, Zane snapped back. Just stick to the plan. Lila's eyes met mine, wide with concern. We sat in tense silence until their footsteps faded. Lila leaned forward, her voice low. Have you checked your mom's jewelry box? The one with the locket. My heart dropped. Mom's locket, a family heirloom passed down through generations. I hadn't even thought to look for it yet. Lila helped me wheel to my parents' bedroom, where the jewelry box sat on the dresser. My hands shook as I opened it. Empty. Maybe Zane moved it somewhere safe? Lila suggested, but we both knew better. Later that afternoon, during one of Loretta's inevitable visits, I saw it. There, hanging around her neck, was my mother's locket. The same one that had contained pictures of my grandparents, the same one my mother had promised would be mine on my wedding day. "That's a beautiful necklace," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. Loretta's hand flew to her throat. "Oh, this old thing?" Zane gave it to me. Said he found it in a drawer somewhere. "Really?" I wheeled closer, noticing how she took a small step back. "Because that's my mother's locket. The one she wore every day for 30 years. The color drained from Loretta's face. I had no idea. Zane must have. Must have what? I cut her off. Stolen it from my dead mother's jewelry box? Just like someone's been stealing everything else in this house. Now, dear, you're getting yourself worked up over nothing." Her voice took on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. "You're still grieving, seeing things that aren't. Take it off." My words came out like ice. "Excuse me, the locket. Take it off and give it to me. Now." For a moment, something ugly flashed across Loretta's perfectly made-up face. Then slowly, she unclasped the necklace and dropped it into my outstretched hand. "I suppose grief can make people rather possessive," she said, smoothing her designer blouse. "I'll just go find Zane." As she clicked away in her expensive heels, I opened the locket with trembling fingers. The pictures inside weren't of my grandparents anymore. They'd been replaced with photos of Zane as a child. "That witch," Lila breathed, looking over my shoulder. "Al, you need to do something. This isn't just about missing stuff anymore. They're trying to erase your family." I closed my fingers around the locket, feeling the metal bite into my palm. "You're right. But first, I need proof. Real proof that shows exactly what they're doing." "I might have an idea about that," Lila said, pulling out her phone. "My brother works in security systems. How do you feel about some hidden cameras?" For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief and confusion. Something that felt dangerously close to satisfaction. "Call him," I said, clutching my mother's locket. "It's time to show the Holloways exactly who they're dealing with." As Lila made the call, I watched Loretta through the window, talking intensely with Zane by their car. They had no idea what was coming. Good. Let them think I was just the grieving, helpless girl in the wheelchair. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Lila's brother installed the cameras while Zane was at another mysterious meeting with his parents. 3 days later, I watched the footage on my laptop, my hands gripping the armrests of my wheelchair, so tight my knuckles turned white. "The insurance money's nearly cleared," Zane's voice crackled through the speakers. He was standing in my father's study with both his parents. "But she's getting suspicious about the missing items." Clyde's usually stoic face showed rare animation. "The house is worth 10 times that insurance payout. We need to convince her to sell before she realizes." "Before she realizes what?" Loretta interrupted, pacing. "That her perfect boyfriend is helping us strip her family home bare? That we've been selling her inheritance piece by piece." My stomach lurched. I forced myself to keep watching. "She trusts me," Zane said, but his voice wavered. "The engagement was a good move. Once you're married, everything becomes community property," Clyde finished. "Including this house." I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short gasps. The doorbell rang, making me jump. Dr. Lynn stood outside, early for my weekly checkup. "Alara," he said, studying my face with concern. "Are you all right?" I wheeled back to let him in, noticing how his eyes swept over the increasingly bare walls. He'd known my parents for years, had been our family doctor since I was a teenager. "They're stealing everything," I blurted out. "Zane and his parents, they're selling my family's belongings. Planning to take the house." Instead of looking surprised, Dr. Lynn's expression turned grim. "I was afraid of something like this. Your father came to see me a week before the accident. He was worried about Zane's sudden interest in your family's finances." My heart stopped. "What?" "He asked me to give you this if anything happened to them." He pulled an envelope from his bag. I was waiting for the right time, but it seems that time is now. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter in my father's precise handwriting, along with several documents. "My dearest Elle," it began. "If you're reading this, something has happened to your mother and me. I've noticed some concerning behavior from Zane recently. Questions about our assets, our property values. Call it paranoia, but I've taken steps to protect you. The documents were legal papers. My father had created a trust before his death, putting the house and most of their assets in my name with ironclad conditions. Even marriage couldn't touch it. They can't take any of it, I whispered, looking up at Dr. Lin. The house, the insurance money, it's all protected. Your father was a careful man, Dr. Lin said softly. He wanted to make sure you were truly protected, not just physically cared for. The front door opened, Zane returning. I quickly handed the papers back to Dr. Lin, who tucked them into his medical bag just as Zane entered. Dr. Lin, Zane smiled his perfect smile. How's our patient doing? Showing remarkable strength, Dr. Lin replied, his tone professional but cool. We'll need to schedule some additional physical therapy sessions. Perhaps 3 times a week. I caught his meaning immediately. 3 times a week would give me more freedom to plan my next move. That sounds perfect, I said, forcing a smile. Zane, honey, could you get me some water? As soon as Zane left the room, Dr. Lin pressed a card into my hand. An excellent lawyer, he whispered. Call her. That evening, I watched Zane cooking dinner in our kitchen, my kitchen, humming to himself like he hadn't spent the afternoon plotting to steal my inheritance. The engagement ring felt like it was burning my finger. My phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Lawyer appointment set for tomorrow. Time to show these thieves what happens when they mess with the wrong family. Fire. I smiled, thinking of my father's foresight, my mother's strength. The Holloways thought they were dealing with a grieving, helpless girl. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Let them keep playing their game. I was done being the pawn. The lawyer's office felt too small for my wheelchair and the weight of what I'd learned. Miss Chen, the attorney Dr. Lin recommended, reviewed the hidden camera footage with sharp eyes. They've been selling items through various online accounts, she said, sliding printouts across her desk. We've traced most of the transactions. Your father's pen collection alone went for thousands. I stared at the papers, recognizing photos of my family's treasures listed on auction sites. Can we get them back? Some. But that's not what concerns me most. She pulled out another document. Someone attempted to access your parents' safety deposit box yesterday. The signature on the request form matches Zane's. My hands clenched around my armrests. What else were they trying to take? Later that afternoon, during my physical therapy session, Dr. Lin noticed my distraction. Your body won't heal if your mind is in chaos, he said, helping me with my exercises. I found my mother's old art supplies in the attic, I replied, changing the subject. She used to paint landscapes. His eyes lit up. Perhaps you should try it. Art can be incredibly therapeutic. That evening, I set up an easel in my bedroom, away from Zane's prying eyes. The blank canvas stared back at me like a challenge. As I picked up the brush, my phone buzzed with a text from Loretta, coming over tomorrow with wedding planners. Time to start making decisions. 2 hearts. The brush in my hand trembled. Then, almost of its own accord, it dipped into the dark red paint. I started painting, not landscapes like my mother, but something else entirely. Something that looked like flames. Hours passed. I barely noticed Zane checking on me, his expression unreadable as he watched me work. The painting took shape, a house burning, but with flowers blooming from the ashes. My house. My legacy. That's intense, Lila said when she arrived the next morning, studying the finished piece. You're planning something, aren't you? Before I could answer, voices drifted up from downstairs. Loretta had arrived early with the wedding planners. We'll need to clear out all this old furniture, Loretta was saying. Start fresh. New beginnings and all that. I wheeled to the top of the ramp, Lila behind me. Loretta stood in my living room with 2 elegant women in business suits, gesturing at my mother's antique furniture like it was yard sale junk. Actually, I said, making them all jump, I've been doing some thinking about new beginnings. Loretta's smile flickered. Wonderful, dear. These ladies have the most amazing ideas for transforming this old place. I meant about the wedding. I touched the engagement ring, which now felt like a brand. And the house. And everything else you've been stealing. The wedding planners exchanged uncomfortable glances as Loretta's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Zane, could you come here, please? He's out, I said, watching her composure crack. Probably trying to access my parents' safety deposit box again. How much do you think that's worth, Loretta? More than my father's pens. You ungrateful little, she caught herself, noticing the wedding planner's shocked expressions. Ladies, could you give us a moment? They practically fled, leaving Loretta glaring at me with undisguised hatred. Everything we've done has been for your own good. You're in no condition to manage this house, this wealth. You mean you're in no condition to keep pretending you're not drowning in debt? I rolled closer, enjoying how she stepped back. Yes, I know about that too. The failed investments, the second mortgage, all of it. Her face contorted. You have no idea what it's like to watch everything slip away. To need. To need what? To steal from a grieving, paralyzed woman. I gestured to my painting, propped against the wall. Look closely, Loretta. That's what's coming. I'm going to burn your whole plan to the ground. She fled, leaving the front door open behind her. Lila whistled low. Demel. That was just the beginning, I finished, reeling back to my easel. I had another painting in mind, this one of a spider caught in its own web. Tomorrow, Zane would come home to find the engagement ring on his pillow. But first, I had some calls to make. Starting with the police. The police arrived just as Zane's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from my studio window as he stepped out, confusion crossing his face at the sight of the patrol cars. Behind him, his parents' Mercedes screeched to a halt. Loretta must have called them. Miss Winslow. Detective Martinez appeared in my doorway. We're ready when you are. I wheeled myself downstairs, Lila following close behind. The living room had become a staging ground, with officers documenting the empty spaces where family heirlooms once stood. Zane stood frozen in the center of it all, his perfect facade finally cracking. Al, what's going on? His voice wavered. Why are the police here? Show them, I said to Detective Martinez, who nodded to another officer. The laptop screen flickered to life, projecting the hidden camera footage onto the wall. Zane's face drained of color as his own voice filled the room. The insurance money's nearly cleared. She trusts me. Once we're married. Loretta burst through the door, Clyde right behind her. This is ridiculous. We were helping her. By selling my father's antique pen collection? I cut in, pulling up the online auction receipts. By trying to access my parents' safety deposit box? That's an interesting definition of help. You don't understand. Zane stepped toward me, but stopped when Lila moved protectively closer. We were going to pay it all back. After the wedding, once everything was settled. You mean once you had control of my inheritance? The words tasted bitter. Once you'd finished stripping away everything my parents worked for? Your parents. Loretta's laugh was sharp. Your precious parents had no idea what it's like to struggle. To watch everything you've built crumble while keeping up appearances. Mother, stop, Zane warned, but she was too far gone. We deserved this. After everything we've sacrificed, everything we've endured, she grabbed my mother's vase from the mantel. The last piece they hadn't managed to sell. This single piece is worth more than your father made in a year. Mrs. Holloway, Detective Martinez stepped forward. Please put down the vase. Instead, she hurled it at the wall above my head. I flinched as porcelain shards rained down, one cutting my cheek. The room erupted into chaos. Officers moved in. Clyde finally spoke up to defend his wife and Zane. Zane just stood there, looking lost between his family and me. Elle, please, he finally said, his voice breaking. I do love you. That part wasn't a lie. No, I touched my bleeding cheek. The lie was thinking I was too broken to fight back. As the officers led the Holloways out, reading them their rights, I felt strangely empty. This was my victory, wasn't it? So why did it feel like I'd lost something too? Later that night, after the police had gone and Lila had reluctantly left, I sat alone in my parents' room. The engagement ring sat heavy in my palm, catching the moonlight like tears. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. A photo appeared, my mother's locket, the one I'd taken back from Loretta, lying smashed on concrete. Below it, words that made my blood freeze. You think this is over? You have no idea what else we took from your parents that night. The implication hit me like a physical blow. The accident that killed my parents and left me paralyzed. Had it really been an accident? I stared at my reflection in the window, at the cut on my cheek still slowly bleeding. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who'd woken up in that hospital room. She was harder now, colder. But maybe that's what I needed to be to uncover the whole truth. I wheeled to my easel and started a new painting. Not of flames this time, but of shattered glass and hidden shadows. Because this wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't fighting just for my inheritance. I was fighting for justice. Detective Martinez called me at dawn. They'd found something in Clyde's office, documents about my parents' accident. I knew where I needed to go. The county jail's visiting room was cold and sterile. Zane sat across from me, still wearing his designer clothes, though they looked rumpled now. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "I didn't expect to see you," he said quietly. I placed the documents on the table between us. "Tell me about the break lines." His face went pale. Don't." My voice was steady, surprising even me. "Just tell me the truth." For once. He stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Dad just wanted to delay them from getting to the lawyer's office. Scare them a little. The room seemed to tilt. Scare them? They were going to change their will. Dad found out through his connections at the bank. Zane's voice cracked. Mom was desperate. The bankruptcy papers were already filed. When she found out your parents were worth millions. So you tampered with their car. The words felt like glass in my throat. Dad did. I knew about it afterward. But by then you were in the hospital and I thought. He reached for my hand. I jerked away. You thought what? That marrying me would make up for killing my parents. I do love you all. That part was real. His eyes filled with tears. When I saw you in that hospital bed, I wanted to protect you. Protect me? I laughed, harsh and cold. By stealing everything they left me? By letting your mother wear my dead mother's jewelry? You don't understand what it's like to lose everything. He slammed his hand on the table. A guard stepped forward, but I waved them back. Actually, I do. Thanks to your family, I lost my parents, my ability to walk, and my trust and love, all in one night. I pulled out my phone, showing him the text message about my mother's locket. Was this you or your mother? His face changed, confusion replacing guilt. What text? I've been in here since the arrest. A chill ran down my spine. If not Zane or his parents, then who? There's something else you should know, he said, leaning forward. Dad wasn't working alone. Someone at the bank helped him access your parents' information. Someone who's still out there. The pieces started falling into place. The mysterious text, the broken locket, the timing of everything. Who? I demanded. I don't know their name. But Dad said they had a grudge against your father from years ago. Something about a failed business deal. A guard announced visiting time was over. As they led Zane away, he turned back. "Elle, I'm sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't help, but..." "You're right," I cut him off. "It doesn't help." Outside, Lila was waiting in her car. One look at my face and she knew something was wrong. "There's more to this than we thought," I said, showing her the documents. "Someone else was involved. Someone who might still be after me." "Then we'll find them," she said firmly. "Together." I touched the scar on my cheek from Loretta's throne vase, thinking about my latest painting, the one of shattered glass and shadows. I'd left space in the corner unfinished, as if waiting for something. Now I knew what belonged there. Truth, emerging from darkness. My phone buzzed again, another anonymous text. "Your father should have listened all those years ago. Now you'll pay for his mistakes." I showed it to Lila, who swore under her breath. "What are you going to do?" I thought about my parents, about justice and revenge, about the fine line between the two. "I'm going to finish my painting," I said. "And then I'm going to find out who's really behind all of this. Because sometimes revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about exposing the truth, no matter how deep it's buried." And I was just getting started. 6 months after the Holloway's arrest, I sat in my studio, surrounded by paintings that told the story of my transformation. The morning light streamed through windows no longer shadowed by doubt and deception. Detective Martinez had called yesterday with news. They'd identified the bank insider who helped orchestrate my parents' accident. My father's former business partner, driven by a decades-old grudge, had finally been arrested. The last piece of the puzzle, falling into place. But revenge, I've learned, wasn't the bomb I'd expected it to be. I wheeled myself to my latest canvas, a work in progress showing a wheelchair transformed into wings. Dr. Lin had suggested art therapy months ago, but it had become more than therapy. It had become my voice, my freedom. Ready for your first gallery showing? Lila appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee and her characteristic optimism. The space downtown is perfect. Almost. I gestured to the stack of recovered family items in the corner. Dad's pens, Mom's books, pieces of our history slowly coming home. I found something else this morning. I handed her a sealed envelope, discovered behind my mother's restored jewelry box. My name was written in her elegant handwriting. Have you opened it? Lila asked softly. Not yet. I took a deep breath. Would you? She carefully broke the seal and began reading. My dearest Elle, if you're reading this, something has happened to me and your father. Know that we saw your strength long before you needed to prove it to anyone else. My mother's words filled the studio, her voice somehow present in every syllable. She wrote about love, about resilience, about the difference between justice and vengeance. And then, your father and I always knew someone might come after our success, our legacy. But our real legacy isn't in the house or the possessions. It's in you, in your spirit that refuses to break. In your heart that knows how to love despite loss. Lila's voice cracked as she read the final lines. Don't let anger define you, sweetheart. Let it refine you. We sat in silence, letting the words settle around us like autumn leaves. She knew, I finally said. They both knew something might happen. And they made sure you were protected, Lila added, touching the legal documents that had saved my inheritance. I wheeled to the window, looking out at the garden I'd started replanting. I spent so long wanting revenge. I almost forgot about living. The doorbell rang, Dr. Lin arriving for my final physical therapy assessment. He'd been right about so many things, especially about finding strength in unexpected places. Your latest work, he said, studying the wheelchair wings painting. It's different. Hopeful. I'm different, I replied, thinking of my mother's words. I thought getting justice would feel like winning. But the real victory was in refusing to let them break me. Later that evening, alone in my studio, I picked up my brushes one last time. On the wings painting, I added something new, a small locket, broken but mending, its pieces held together by golden light. My phone buzzed, a message from the prison. Zane wanted to see me one last time before his transfer. I deleted it without responding. Some chapters needed to stay closed. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed, Dear Mom and Dad, today I finally understood what you meant about legacy. The house creaked softly around me, no longer haunted by what was stolen but filled with what remained, strength, memory. Love transformed by fire but not consumed by it. Outside, the garden waited for tomorrow's light. I'd planted roses where Mom's used to grow, but added wildflowers too, something new among the familiar. Like me, the garden was both memory and possibility, roots and wings. My story wasn't ending. It was evolving, like paint changing color as it dried, revealing deeper shades beneath the surface. And I was ready for whatever canvas came next. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in destroying what hurt you, but in creating something beautiful from the ashes. That's what my parents would have wanted. That's what I wanted too.